Most strategy games sell a specific illusion. You command armies, direct economies, and conquer continents with godlike authority over a perfectly synchronized machine. Japanese simulation RPGs, like Tactics Ogre and Fire Emblem, take that exact power fantasy and invert it. They trap you inside rigid hierarchies, where your choices are mathematically suffocated by the system itself. If you watch a geopolitical tragedy unfold in an anime like 86 or Attack on Titan, you experience the horror as an observer. In a simulation RPG, you are the one issuing the commands. You become complicit. Game designer Ian Bogost calls this procedural rhetoric. It is the concept that games make arguments not through dialogue trees or cutscenes, but through their underlying rules and mechanics. By forcing you to interact with rigid mathematical boundaries, procedural rhetoric can effectively model the inescapable gravity of structural inequality. Text describes the effects of oppression. Mechanics force you to operate within its logic. To decode how these games construct an architecture of oppression, we have to look past the fictional narratives. We are going to map classical sociological frameworks, from Max Weber to Michel Foucault, directly onto the game mechanics. To uncover the source of this institutional violence, we must look past the narrative fiction and interrogate the mathematical rules the player is forced to obey. Tactics Ogre drops the player into the Valerian Isles, a region tearing itself apart through a brutal, multi-ethnic conflict. You are immediately forced to navigate competing factions fighting for survival. The developers modeled this fictional power struggle directly on the ethnic cleansing and geopolitical collapse of the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s. Early in the campaign, your commander orders you to participate in the Balma Musa massacre. The plan is to slaughter your own people in a false flag operation to frame a rival faction and ignite a war. The game presents a binary choice. You can obey the order and participate in the atrocity on the law route, or you can refuse on moral grounds and defect on the chaos route. This decision tree illustrates the game's mechanical reality. Whether you obey or defect, the massacre occurs without you. The game weaponizes your moral agency, demanding an ethical judgment, but mechanically denying you the power to enforce it. This design choice functions as a deliberate procedural argument about the unstoppable momentum of systemic violence. You can make the right moral choice, but Tactics Ogre mathematically proves an individual is utterly powerless to stop a machine they do not control. If systemic violence is so destructive, we have to ask how these regimes justify their actions to the populace in the first place. Sociologist Max Weber outlined how authority transitions over time. Charismatic power is eventually codified into institutionalized authority, requiring formal systems of justification to maintain control. Fire Emblem Three Houses proceduralizes Weber's theory through its crest system. Crests are genetic markers of magical power, used by the ruling class to enforce biological determinism and legitimize their noble birthrights. The game exposes the hypocrisy of this genetic lottery mechanically. As you build your army, you routinely recruit crestless nobles, who are treated as failures, alongside crest-bearing commoners whose existence threatens the order. The system's contradictions are baked into the character stats. Triangle strategy takes a different approach. The nation of Hyzante uses religious doctrine to justify a brutal monopoly on salt. They enforce the systemic enslavement of the Rosellan people by claiming it is divine punishment for ancient sins. This network graph represents Triangle Strategy's voting system. It translates real-world pluralistic friction into a playable system. You cannot simply declare an ethical crusade. To win a vote, you must satisfy allies' competing demands, balancing economic incentives against political liberty. These mechanics illustrate that structural discrimination rarely relies on a single cartoon villain. It survives because of the agonizing gridlock of competing, rationalized interests within a bureaucracy. Once an oppressive system is firmly entrenched, a state must figure out how to maintain control over its subjects without fighting a constant war. Michel Foucault proposed a model of productive power, where institutions create compliant subjects through the constant application of discipline and education. Foucault used the panopticon as his architectural metaphor. It is a prison with a central watchtower, where inmates behave perfectly by internalizing the constant surveillance. Fire Emblem Three Houses places you directly in that watchtower. You do not start the game as a battlefield commander. You are a teacher, placed within a strict religious military academy. The lesson planning UI is a direct procedural simulation of Foucaultian discipline. You assign grades, dictate career paths, monitor motivation, and optimize student skills to serve the church. This creates a jarring juxtaposition. In dialogue scenes, your students complain bitterly about the oppressive class structure. Minutes later, you use the UI to mold those same students into highly efficient military tools for the state. The simulation RPG brilliantly makes you the active administrator of disciplinary power. You execute the very authority the narrative claims to fight against. We have mapped a distinct three-phase life cycle of systemic violence: the construction of authority, the maintenance of that power through discipline, and the inevitable collapse into violent conflict. Passive Japanese media approaches these themes differently. Anime, like Attack on Titan, maps out the cyclical pipeline from victim to perpetrator, while 86 details the bureaucratic dehumanization of minority groups. Those series excel at generating empathy. However, because they are passive mediums, they inherently position the audience as powerless observers to the tragedy. You watch the machine work from a safe distance. Simulation RPGs strip away that comfortable distance. They force the audience into the uncomfortable role of the complicit administrator, pressing the buttons that keep the machine running. This split-screen visual illustrates game theorist Jesper Juhl's rule versus fiction duality. In these games, the emotional, stylistic fiction of the narrative is constantly colliding with the cold, rigid rules of the data tables. The famous moral ambiguity of Japanese SRPGs is a direct result of this collision. The game forces your human empathy to grind against the rationalized mathematics of a discriminatory system. When a virtual atrocity occurs under your command, we have to ask who is ultimately to blame. Is it the player, or the narrative, or the rules of the game? Political scientist Benedict Anderson explored how communities construct official histories to maintain power. He noted the vital importance of counter-memory, alternative narratives that challenge the state's official record. The game mechanics act as a repository for the official version of events, the mandatory objectives you must fulfill. By forcing you to act against your conscience to progress, the game creates a lasting internal friction. This tension functions as a counter-memory, a personal record that challenges the clean, heroic narratives often found in real-world political myths. By placing players inside rigid, unfair mathematical systems, these games offer a profound simulation of why real-world political absurdities are so difficult to dismantle. The system is designed to protect itself. You are subjected to the unstoppable momentum of an institution that does not care about your moral objections. You are just a cog expected to turn in the correct direction. These procedural simulations prove that surviving a broken world is insufficient. To stop the cycle of violence, you cannot simply swap out the players. You have to rewrite the underlying rules of the